I never imagined I'd be packing a suitcase at 63, not for a family trip, not to visit grandchildren, but to leave it all behind. Not to escape, but to reclaim something I had forgotten. I was allowed to have my own life. I had spent decades folding laundry, paying bills, and making sacrifices everyone expected, until one day I realized I was only visible when I was useful. So I made a quiet decision, one my son didn't see coming. I signed away the house he had already planned to sell. I booked a one-way ticket to Oregon, and I left behind a letter, not for approval, but for closure. That day I walked away from everything they thought I was, and stepped toward everything I was about to become. They call it the golden years, but I sometimes wondered who got to name them. Standing in my quiet kitchen that morning, I was anything but golden. The ticking of the clock seemed louder in a house that used to hum with life. I was Eleanor Whitman, 63 years old, a widow for 4 years, and most days I felt like I was fading into the wallpaper of my own life. I lived in the same modest home in the suburbs of Wisconsin that my late husband Gerald and I had bought when we were young and hopeful. We had poured every penny into this house, believing it would be the nest where our family would flourish. And for a time it was. Gerald had passed suddenly. Heart failure, they called it, though I sometimes thought it was the accumulation of decades of quiet sacrifices. When he left, it felt like the house had swallowed me whole. Ryan, my only son, lived in the city now. 35 years old, married to Camille, a woman who had mastered the art of a polite smile that never reached her eyes. Camille was sharp, successful, and always seemed to speak to me like I was an outdated relic collecting dust on a shelf. I had spent 2 weeks preparing for Ryan's 35th birthday. Not because anyone asked me to, certainly not Camille, but because that's what mothers did, didn't they? Even when the world forgot you, you clung to these small rituals. I scrubbed the floors until they gleamed, washed, the curtains, mowed the lawn myself. I even touched up the white paint on the porch railings. I clipped fresh roses from the garden and arranged them in vases I had owned for decades. I cooked Ryan's favorite pot roast and baked a triple-layer chocolate cake from scratch, because that was his favorite growing up. I wanted the house to feel like home again, even if only for a few hours. Truth be told, I had spent far more than I should have. Between Social Security checks and Gerald's leftover insurance money, I managed, but just barely. I had pinched pennies all year for this day, skipping dinners out, mending old clothes instead of buying new ones, and letting the idea of retirement luxuries slip quietly out of reach. But I didn't mind, I told myself. This was for my son. This was my way of reminding him, of reminding myself, that I still mattered, that I was still his mother, not just a name in his phone or an address on a holiday card. I remembered when Ryan was little how he used to cling to my legs when I cooked, giggling while I tried to chop vegetables, how he used to call me his hero in his crayon-scrawled Mother's Day cards. Those memories had grown dusty, tucked into the corners of my heart, but they were still there. I thought maybe, just maybe today I would feel that closeness again. As I moved through the kitchen, checking on the roast and making sure the candles on the dining table were perfectly aligned, my reflection caught my eye in the hallway mirror. My hands, once soft and delicate, were now lined and rough from years of scrubbing, lifting, working. My face bore the quiet story of someone who had given everything and asked for little in return. 63 years old, I thought. I didn't feel frail, but I also didn't feel seen. I had chosen my nicest navy blue dress for the occasion, the one with tiny silver thread details that glinted just enough to feel festive without being flashy. I had even pulled out the pearl earrings Gerald had given me on our 20th anniversary. It had been years since I had worn them, but today felt like a day for little reminders of who I used to be, who I maybe still was somewhere under the layers of routine and resignation. The house looked beautiful. The table was set with my best china, the crystal glasses sparkling beneath the chandelier. I even polished the silverware despite knowing most people wouldn't notice. But I would know, and maybe, just maybe, Ryan would notice too. Maybe he'd see how much effort I'd poured into making his day special and remember how much I loved him. Maybe Camille would soften a little and the kids, Ethan and Lily, might look up from their gadgets long enough to give me a real smile. Hope was a stubborn thing, and even after everything I held onto it, I checked the time, 1:55 p.m. They would be arriving any moment. My heart fluttered in my chest the way it always did before family gatherings, a cocktail of excitement and quiet dread. I knew the chances of being genuinely appreciated were slim, but a mother's heart is wired to hope even when experience tells her otherwise. I smoothed the fabric of my dress one last time, adjusted the pearls at my neck, and took a deep breath. 63 years old, a widow living alone in a house too big for one person, but still standing, still showing up, still trying. As the doorbell rang sharply through the house, I plastered on a smile, the one I'd perfected over the years. A smile that masked exhaustion, disappointment, and quiet longing. This was Ryan's day. Maybe it could be mine too. Just a little bit. Maybe for a few fleeting moments I wouldn't feel like the forgotten shadow in the corner. Maybe, just maybe, I would feel like someone's mother again. I walked toward the door, straightened my back, lifted my chin, and turned the knob with a steady hand. Behind that door was my family, however fractured, however distant. And today I told myself I would welcome them like I always had. Because it was all I knew. Because I was Eleanor Whitman, a mother first and always. And as I opened the door to the faces of my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandchildren, I held on to that identity tightly, not yet realizing that by the end of the day, everything I thought I knew about my place in this family would be broken. But for now, I smiled and welcomed them home. The house smelled of rosemary and garlic when they walked in, but no one noticed. Ryan strolled through the front door like it was his rightful domain, his car keys jangling in one hand while he sent a quick text with the other. Camille followed right behind, tall, sleek, dressed in one of those beige trench coats that made her look like she had just walked out of some glossy magazine. She gave me the kind of smile that barely touched her lips, the kind that was more habit than feeling. "Hi, Mom?" Ryan said absently, bending to peck my cheek without really looking at me. Camille hovered by the doorway, her eyes scanning the house as though she were already mentally rearranging furniture that wasn't hers. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said softly, hoping the warmth in my voice might break through whatever distance time and life had built between us. Two small bodies pushed through the door after them. Ethan, 10, and Lily, 8. Both had headphones on, eyes glued to their tablets, thumbs darting across screens with robotic ease. They mumbled something that might have been "Hi, Grandma," but never once lifted their eyes to meet mine. They breezed past me, following the Wi-Fi signal straight to the couch. I swallowed the familiar lump rising in my throat and turned my attention back to Ryan and Camille. "Come in, make yourselves comfortable," I said, ushering them into the dining room where the table was set in perfect symmetry, the meal laid out in courses like I'd seen in fancy restaurants. Camille's heels clicked against the hardwood as she walked through the house, her gaze moving over the details I had poured my heart into. Fresh flowers, polished china, the photos of Ryan growing up that I had arranged along the hallway. She gave a tight-lipped smile, then leaned over and whispered to Ryan, but not so quietly that I couldn't hear. "You know this house really is too big for her." I blinked, my hands frozen mid-reach toward a wine glass. My smile faltered for just a moment before I pasted it back on. It wasn't the first time Camille had said things like that. Little jabs dressed up as concern, subtle, polite enough to seem caring, but laced with criticism. Ryan didn't respond, just shrugged and moved toward the liquor cabinet I had stocked with his favorite bourbon. Another little luxury I had budgeted for, knowing it would make him happy. As more guests trickled in, some of Ryan's college friends, I barely remembered a couple of Camille's social circle. I floated between the kitchen and dining room, topping off drinks, ensuring plates were full, checking on the roast. I became invisible in my own home, reduced to a hostess with no name. No one asked how I was. No one cared that my knees ached from 2 days of cooking, or that my back throbbed from scrubbing floors that none of them would even notice. The children stayed glued to their screens, shoveling food into their mouths without acknowledgement of who prepared it. Camille smiled sweetly when people complimented the meal, saying, Oh, I wish I had the time to cook like this, as if I had nothing better to do with my days. At one point, I overheard Camille chatting with a neighbor I had invited at Ryan's request. Eleanor really should consider downsizing, she said, swirling her wine glass. It's so much house for one person, and honestly, the upkeep must be overwhelming. Not to mention the market's hot right now. A house like this could really help the kids' college funds. She spoke like I wasn't standing 10 feet away, like I was a financial asset to be evaluated rather than a human being. I stayed quiet, biting the inside of my cheek, my smile slowly calcifying into something rigid and hollow. My hands moved on autopilot, serving, clearing, refilling glasses. The house was full, but I had never felt more alone. After dinner, as the evening wore on and people grew more relaxed, the tone shifted. Ryan stood up to make a little speech. I stood in the kitchen doorway, my heart warming at the thought that maybe, just maybe, he would say something kind, something that would remind me I was more than just background noise in his life. He raised his glass, swaying slightly from the alcohol. "Thanks for coming, everyone." He started that wide, charming grin spreading across his face, the one I used to think lit up a room. "You all know my mom, Eleanor. The best cook in the world." A few people clapped politely, their attention half on their drinks. Ryan continued chuckling. "I mean, let's be honest, Mom's not getting any younger, but hey, at least she's still useful. She's the free labor in the family, keeping the food coming and the house clean." The room erupted in laughter. Light, careless laughter. But every syllable slammed into my chest like a fist. My hands tightened around the serving tray I was holding, fingers trembling. I caught sight of Camille smiling smugly, not a hint of embarrassment on her perfectly made-up face. Not a single person looked uncomfortable. No one defended me, no one told him he had crossed a line. I was just the old woman in the kitchen, the housemaid with a family label. The rest of the evening was a blur. I smiled, I nodded. I carried on like I hadn't just been publicly reduced to a servant in my own home. I packed up leftover cake, offered take-home containers to guests who barely said thank you, and stood at the door waving them off one by one as though their company had been a gift, not a wound. When the last car pulled away, and the house fell silent, I turned off the lights, blew out the candles, and sat at the head of the dining table I had so meticulously arranged just hours before. The crystal glasses gleamed under the moonlight, mocking me. My body felt heavy, my heart heavier. I had raised Ryan with everything I had. Time, love, sacrifice. I had given up promotions, hobbies, friendships, dreams, all for this family. I had built this home with Gerald, turned it into a sanctuary where love was supposed to bloom. And here I was, 63 years old, left with a table of dirty dishes and an empty house that didn't feel like home anymore. I let out a bitter laugh, one that caught in my throat. I thought of the years I had spent trying to be needed, thinking that was the only way to feel loved. But tonight it became clear. I wasn't family anymore. I was just free labor. And for the first time I whispered to myself, I didn't realize. I've become a maid in my own home. Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes, but they didn't fall. Something colder settled in their place. A quiet, steely resolve I hadn't felt in decades. They thought I was useful. They thought I was free labor. They had no idea what I was capable of. Yet, the morning after the party, the house smelled faintly of leftovers and candle wax. I stood in the kitchen rinsing the wine glasses, my hands moving through the motions, while my mind felt distant and foggy. I had hardly slept, replaying Ryan's words over and over in my head. Free labor. That phrase had settled in my chest like a stone, heavy and unmoving. The doorbell rang shortly after 10, and I assumed Ryan had come back to pick up the casserole dish he'd left behind. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door only to find Camille standing there, impeccably dressed, holding a leather-bound folder in her hands. Her smile was tight professional, more corporate than familial. "Morning." "Eleanor," she said, breezing past me without waiting for an invitation. "Ryan's on a conference call, but we thought it'd be good for me to stop by today to talk through some things." I frowned slightly, stepping aside as she made herself comfortable in my living room. crossing her legs elegantly as though she was in a client meeting. She placed the folder on the coffee table and looked at me with a practiced expression of concern. "Listen, we've been meaning to have this conversation for a while. Last night sort of confirmed it for us." Camille began, her voice syrupy, but her words sharp. "You've been taking on so much by yourself, Eleanor, and it's really time you let yourself rest." Something about the way she said rest made my stomach twist. I didn't sit. I remained standing, arms folded, waiting for her to continue. "You deserve to enjoy the next chapter of your life somewhere with proper care, with professional staff around, you know. Activities, a lovely community, no stress about cooking and cleaning." She flipped open the folder and pushed a glossy brochure toward me. "We've been looking into Sunset Hollow. It's a beautiful assisted living facility just 20 minutes from our place. Chef-prepared meals, daily programs, medical staff on site. You'd love it." I stared at the brochure, my pulse thudding in my ears. It was surreal, almost laughable, to be pitched my own displacement like it was a vacation package. And of course, Camille continued, straightening the papers in front of her. "It makes financial sense, too. This house is, well, let's be honest, it's a lot for one person. Maintenance, property taxes, utilities. It adds up. The market's great right now, and the equity in this house could easily fund your living expenses and," she smiled, "help the kids' college savings along, too." My throat felt dry. I swallowed hard before finding my voice. "Ryan agrees with this?" I asked quietly, already knowing the answer. Camille's smile never wavered. "He's the one who encouraged me to come over this morning. We just want what's best for you. You shouldn't have to burden yourself with all this," she gestured around the room like my home was some crumbling relic. "Besides, with everything going on, we thought it would be less stressful if you let us handle the logistics." I felt a flicker of anger ripple beneath my skin. "What logistics?" Camille leaned forward, flipping to the next page in the folder. A printed real estate market report. "We've already had a couple of appraisals done. A local agent, Stephen Garland, came by a few days ago. Ryan coordinated it. Didn't want to overwhelm you with the details until we had solid options." My legs felt weak, and I finally sat down, my hands gripping the edges of the armchair. And Camille continued, her tone turning even more casual to avoid any paperwork headaches. "Ryan went ahead and filed for temporary financial guardianship. Just until we get things settled. With how forgetful you've been lately, we figured it's safer this way. You don't need to stress over signatures and bank details." My mouth went dry. "You filed for guardianship?" The words felt foreign, like they belonged in someone else's life. Camille nodded briskly like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "It's standard. Just a precaution. We're thinking of listing the house by the end of the month. That way you can be comfortably moved in before the holidays. No more worrying about decorating or grocery shopping." Or, she laughed lightly, "cleaning up after another birthday party." I stared at her, the walls of my home suddenly closing in around me. Every photo on the mantle, every trinket collected over decades. Every late night spent rocking Ryan to sleep in the nursery upstairs. Reduced to a line item on a financial plan. I thought of the sweat that had gone into paying off this mortgage, the sacrifices that had kept this roof over our heads after Gerald died, the pride I had in keeping this house running on my modest means. And now, without a conversation, without a question, my life had been evaluated, audited, and scheduled for liquidation. My head throbbed as Camille rattled off details about the deposit they had already put down at Sunset Hollow, the closing date the realtor suggested, how much Ethan and Lily's college funds would grow with the proceeds. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw that brochure across the room. But my body stayed still. My hands clenched in my lap, my nails pressing little crescents into my skin. Camille's phone buzzed and she glanced down. "Anyway, Ryan will be here after his call to go over paperwork. Just think about it, okay?" She patted my hand like I was some fragile doll and walked toward the door. I didn't respond. I couldn't. When the door clicked shut behind her, I sat in the deafening silence, the faint smell of last night's pot roast still lingering. The house suddenly felt too quiet, too foreign. I walked into the kitchen on shaky legs, staring at the folder she'd left behind, lying there like a contract to erase me from my own life. That evening I searched for the paperwork Camille mentioned. My heart sank when I found it. Ryan's name as temporary financial guardian pending full approval. Appraisals neatly stacked in the folder brokerage forms halfway completed. Sunset Hollow brochures tucked between legal letters. They hadn't just planned to move me. They had orchestrated my exit like a business transaction. My mind reeled, my body numb. All the years of loving, sacrificing, showing up without fail meant nothing more than dollars and convenience to them. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window staring out into my garden, the roses I had planted still standing tall despite the chill in the autumn air. For the first time in my life I saw it clearly. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was a liability, a burden to be managed. And something inside me broke, but something else stirred. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop being quiet, time to stop accepting whatever role they decided for me. Maybe it was time to fight for myself, for my home, for my life. And that thought, that tiny spark, kept me awake until dawn. The morning after my sleepless night, I stood in the kitchen gripping a cup of coffee I barely tasted. I sat at the small kitchen table staring at the numbers on the back of old bills, trying to piece together what I had left. For too long I had let my life be handled in pieces, fixing whatever needed fixing, paying what needed paying, surviving day by day. But now, for the first time in years, I was determined to see the full picture. I pulled out the old folder where Gerald used to keep everything. My fingers traced over his neat handwriting on the tabs. Mortgage, paid off, insurance, claim settled. I flipped through every paper, every statement. The house was mine, free and clear. There were no outstanding debts, no hidden loans, no credit cards to my name. Just utilities, property taxes, and the daily grind. My savings sat at a modest $42,000, left over from Gerald's life insurance, a lifetime of frugal habits, and years of careful budgeting. It wasn't a fortune, but it was freedom waiting quietly in a bank account I had barely thought about beyond emergencies. And maybe this was the emergency I had ignored for too long. Later that afternoon, I stood by the fence that bordered my backyard, trying to clear my head. The wind rustled through the bare branches, and the last of the autumn roses clung stubbornly to life. That's when I heard a familiar voice, soft but unmistakable. Eleanor Whitman. Is that really you? I turned, surprised to see Margaret Summers. Maggie. Walking along the sidewalk, a grocery bag in one hand, her gray-streaked hair caught up in a messy bun. She still had that spark in her eye, the one I remembered from block parties and neighborhood cookouts before time and grief had made me retreat into my walls. Maggie. I blinked, stepping forward, my lips curving into a genuine smile for the first time in days. Within minutes, we were sitting on my porch, 2 cups of tea between us. Conversation flowed easily like old times, easing the tightness in my chest. I listened as Maggie filled me in on her life. Widowed at 53, sold the family home at 55, traveled to Europe, lived in a coastal town for a year, and recently returned to Wisconsin to be closer to her sister. But it was her eyes that really lit up when she talked about something else, her time in Napa Valley. I took a sommelier course, she said, grinning like a teenager with a secret. Wine tasting, pairing, understanding flavors. Completely outside anything I'd ever done before. And I loved every second of it. I sat there stunned, marveling at this version of Maggie I had never known. Wait, you studied wine? I asked, incredulous. She chuckled, swirling her tea like it was a glass of Merlot. Why not? Life didn't end after my husband passed. Actually, that's when I realized. Life was finally mine. I spent so long putting everyone else first, I forgot I had dreams too. Napa Valley, the Oregon wine trails, little towns with big skies. I just packed up and went. Her words landed like seeds, embedding themselves deep within me. I thought, maybe it was too late to start something new. I admitted, voice softer than I intended. Maggie shook her head with a knowing smile. It's only too late when you stop breathing. I let those words linger, the possibilities swirling around me like an unexpected breeze. I hadn't traveled in decades. I hadn't thought about hobbies or dreams or interests beyond cooking dinners and folding laundry. My life had been boxed into routines: bake the cake, pay the bills, make sure everyone else was happy. But what if there was more? What if I could be more? As we chatted, Maggie told me about towns in Oregon, about the slower pace, the community feel, the beauty of the vineyards, and the richness of learning something new. Her stories ignited something I thought had long gone extinct, a small flicker of longing. That evening after Maggie left, I pulled out a notebook and wrote for the first time in years. I made a list, not of grocery items or chores, but of things I'd once wanted to do, things I had quietly erased from my life to make room for everyone else. At the top of the list, learn about wine, travel to the West Coast, live in a place that made my soul feel alive. By the time the moon rose, my list had grown longer. Small dreams, big dreams, forgotten dreams. They all found their way onto that yellowed page. And then the more practical questions crept in. Could I sell this house on my own terms? Could I protect my assets from Ryan and Camille? Could I, just for once, choose myself? I stayed up late researching real estate brokers. I avoided the ones recommended by neighbors, knowing they'd be too easily swayed by the kind of pressure Camille excelled at. Instead, I found a smaller independent agency known for discretion and honesty. Connolly and Bright Realty. The owner, Hannah Connolly, was a no-nonsense woman who believed in protecting homeowners from predatory sales tactics. The next morning, I called her. By noon, Hannah stood in my living room, clipboard in hand, offering a refreshingly honest assessment of my home. "It's a solid house," she said, "and with the market this strong, I can have it under contract within 2 weeks if you want it done quickly." For the first time in days, my heart didn't sink at the mention of selling my house. It lifted. But I said firmly, "I'm selling it because I choose to, not because anyone else told me to." Hannah's lips curved into a grin. Music to my ears. Mrs. Whitman. My next call was to Peter Wallace Gerald's old attorney, a man who had handled everything from wills to property transfers for us for over 20 years. I hadn't spoken to him since the months after Gerald's passing, but his warm, steady voice immediately eased my nerves. "Peter," I said after explaining the situation, "I want to make sure my decisions are protected. No power of attorney, no guardianship games. I want full control of my finances and assets, and I want to know what I need to do to keep it that way." "Understood," he said without hesitation. "You have every legal right to take back control, Eleanor. Let's meet tomorrow. I'll draft the necessary paperwork. You're sharper than most people half your age, and it's time they remembered that." By the end of the day, the haze in my mind had begun to lift. I saw with painful clarity how easily I had let my life be reduced to convenience for others. How I had taught them to take me for granted by never saying no, by always being available, by measuring my worth in chores and sacrifices. But that was over. For the first time in decades, I wasn't planning my next casserole or worrying about someone else's schedule. I was planning my freedom. And it felt terrifying. It felt exhilarating. It felt like the first breath after too many years underwater. Tomorrow I would protect what was mine. Tomorrow I would start the process to sell this house. Not because Ryan wanted me to, but because I deserved to live on my own terms. I wasn't just someone's mother anymore. I was becoming Eleanor again. And that was just the beginning. The next week unfolded like the slow peeling of old wallpaper. Layers of my life coming away one by one, revealing pieces of myself I had almost forgotten. I moved quietly but deliberately, making decisions I never thought I'd have the courage to make. Hannah, the real estate agent, was true to her word. Within days, there were offers on the house, but I wasn't interested in selling to just anyone. This home had seen the best and worst of me, held every memory of Gerald, watched Ryan take his first steps and speak his first words. It wasn't just a house. It was the final testament to a life I had built with love. That's when I thought of Harper. Harper McMillan had been my childhood friend, the girl who used to braid my hair before school, who came over every Christmas Eve to help decorate cookies. Life had pulled us in different directions, but we always stayed in touch. When Gerald passed, Harper had driven across the state just to sit by my side, bringing me warm casseroles and warmer hugs. She had always been the kind of person who showed up when it mattered without asking for anything in return. Harper had recently gone through a painful divorce, left rebuilding her life from scratch. She lived in a cramped rental apartment on the edge of town, working double shifts to support herself after being blindsided by her ex-husband's debts. It didn't take me long to make up my mind. My fingers trembled a little as I signed the transfer documents in Peter Wallace's office. Harper would get the house. Not as a sale, not as a business transaction, but as a gift. A gift from one woman to another, from one forgotten soul to another who deserved more. She wouldn't have to fight for scraps anymore. She'd have a home. A real one. When Peter looked at me over the stack of papers, he smiled softly. "Not many people would do this," he said. I shrugged, blinking back the sting in my eyes. Harper stood by me when I had nothing left. I'd rather this house stay with someone who sees its walls as shelter, not as cash flow. With that decision, a weight I didn't realize I was carrying began to lift. I took care of every lingering responsibility. I paid off the small credit card balances I had canceled, unnecessary subscriptions, and put a clean closure to every account that tied me to this version of my life. My savings were modest, but after settling everything, I had enough to support a fresh beginning, enough to choose what I wanted instead of what was expected of me. It felt strange, almost surreal, to book a one-way ticket. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, and chose a destination that had lived in my heart for years, but never in my reality. Willamette Valley, Oregon, a place known for its vineyards, its open skies, its quiet rhythm. I signed up for a 6-week sommelier course in a little town called Silverton, the same one Maggie had mentioned with such affection. For once, I didn't overthink it. I didn't weigh the pros and cons to death. I didn't ask anyone's opinion. I simply acted. Packing was both easy and gut-wrenching. I walked through each room and asked myself what mattered, not to anyone else but to me. The answer, I realized, was surprisingly little. Clothes, I actually liked my favorite set of tea mugs, the photo of Gerald and me on our 25th anniversary, a worn paperback copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. That was it. The rest could stay. It felt good to travel light, to unshackle myself from decades of clutter that had only weighed me down. Camille could have called it downsizing, but to me it was liberation. Before I left, I sat down to write a letter, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I chose my words carefully, folding every ounce of quiet strength into the page. Ryan. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not disappeared, but choosing my own path for the first time in many years. This house won't be part of your plans anymore. I've passed it on to someone who values it for what it is, a home, not an asset. I am not going to any assisted living facility. I am not handing over control of my life, my money, or my decisions. I have rescinded the guardianship paperwork, and I've ensured every legal avenue is protected. I gave my entire life to raising you, to holding our family together, to making sure you had every chance to succeed. And now I'm giving something to myself, freedom. I hope someday you will understand. I hope someday you'll look back and realize this was never about anger. It was about remembering I am a person beyond being a mother. I wish you well, but from this day forward, my life belongs to me. Eleanor. I sealed the letter, placed it on the kitchen counter where I knew Ryan would eventually find it, and took one last walk around the house. The memories were thick in the walls, the laughter, the tears, the milestones that had shaped me into the woman I had almost forgotten I was. But I didn't cry. Not this time. This goodbye was different. It wasn't grief. It wasn't loss. It was a reclaiming. When the taxi pulled up to the curb, my suitcase waiting by the front door, I didn't hesitate. I locked the door behind me, dropped the keys into an envelope labeled, "For Harper," and left it with Peter to deliver. The driver asked me where I was headed. I smiled and answered simply, "To the rest of my life." As we pulled away from the house, I didn't look back. Not once. Because I knew everything I needed was ahead of me now. My freedom, my joy, my rediscovery of self, all of it waited in the vineyards of Oregon. In the friendships yet to be made, in the simple pleasure of doing something just for me. For 63 years I had been the steady presence, the support beam, the quiet caretaker. Now, I was finally choosing myself. And it felt like breathing for the very first time. The moment I stepped off the bus in Silverton, Oregon, the air felt different. Clean, crisp, with a faint sweetness I couldn't quite place. Rows of vineyards stretched along the hillsides like soft green waves, and the streets were lined with tiny shops where people still smiled at strangers. It was small, unpretentious, and exactly what my soul had been aching for. My temporary home was a cozy room above a small family-run bed and breakfast. The floors creaked. The wallpaper was a little faded, but it was mine. For the first time in years, there was no one to ask me to change sheets, no laundry baskets waiting to be folded, no calendar filled with other people's obligations. Just me, my curiosity, and an open road I had never dared to walk before. The sommelier course began the next day. I walked into the little classroom tucked behind a vineyard called Cedar Hill Estates, feeling like a nervous schoolgirl. But the instructor, a sharp, funny woman named Colette, welcomed me with a warmth that instantly set me at ease. There were only 7 of us, people of all ages and backgrounds, and for once I wasn't the oldest or the odd one out. I learned about the legs on a glass of wine, about how tannins could dry your tongue, how a sip could carry whispers of blackberries or oak or a rainy summer. I swirled, sniffed, sipped, and for the first time in decades my opinion mattered. No one corrected me. No one told me what I should be tasting. They asked what I tasted, what I felt, and listened like my voice had value. In the evenings, I'd wander the quiet town square, letting the scent of fresh bread from the corner bakery follow me home. I cooked meals just for myself. Simple things, but made with care. I tried local produce I had never tasted before, learned to make homemade pasta, and took my time savoring each bite. Eating wasn't a chore anymore, it was an experience. Maggie called me every other evening, her voice bubbling with excitement and encouragement. We talked about everything: the wine, the food, the places I explored on my afternoon walks. Her friendship became my quiet anchor, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this new chapter. Sometimes she would laugh and say, "Who would have thought, Eleanor, we'd be living out our best years now?" And I would smile, realizing she was right. I made new friends, too. Linda, a retired nurse who had always wanted to travel but never had the chance, and Malik, a widower in his early 50s, who had quit his corporate job to open a small cafe. We'd share lunch breaks, swapping stories about life before and dreams we were just now daring to pursue. There was no judgment, no hierarchy, just people discovering who they were outside of the roles they had been boxed into. For the first few days, I kept my phone off. I wanted nothing to break the fragile peace blooming inside me. But eventually curiosity got the better of me. I powered it on, expecting silence. Instead, it exploded. Voicemails, text messages. Ryan's name flashed across the screen more times than I could count. At first I hesitated to listen. I didn't want to invite their voices into this newfound quiet. But eventually I pressed play. His messages shifted from disbelief to fury. "Mom, what are you thinking? This isn't how families handle things. You're being irresponsible. You've lost your mind. You gave away my inheritance. I'm calling a lawyer." Each message sounded like a hammer striking the same old nail. Control, entitlement, possession. There was no warmth, no curiosity about how I was, only anger over what he believed he was owed. I should have felt shaken, but I didn't. I sat on the porch of the bed and breakfast, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands, and let his words drift away on the breeze. His outrage didn't own me anymore. His disappointment didn't dictate my worth. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Peter, my attorney. "Ryan's threatening to sue," he told me. "He's claiming mental incompetence trying to challenge the property transfer. He's already contacted 2 firms. I took a slow sip of tea before answering. "And what are my options, Peter?" He chuckled softly. "Your paperwork is ironclad. You followed every legal step. I've seen clients collapse under family pressure, but you've done everything by the book. Legally, you're untouchable." I exhaled, the last remnants of tension easing from my shoulders. Let them shout, Peter. Let them hire every lawyer in the state. I'm not afraid of them anymore. That night I sat at the tiny kitchen table in my room, a half-finished glass of Pinot Noir beside me, and wrote in my journal. A habit I had let go of years ago. The words flowed easily, a quiet declaration to myself. For 63 years I lived within other people's expectations. I served, I sacrificed. I waited for validation that never came. Tonight, for the first time, I am free from all of it. I don't fear losing family, I don't fear starting over, and I certainly don't fear their anger. For the first time in my life, the only person I answer to is myself. I closed the journal with a smile tugging at my lips. I wasn't afraid of lawyers or lawsuits or Ryan's tantrums. I had faced years of loneliness, of unspoken grief, of fading into the background of my own life. But here, I was learning to live. And for the first time in 63 years, the only person I feared disappointing was me. And I didn't plan to ever do that again. The letter arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope, delivered to the front desk of the bed and breakfast by overnight courier. I recognized Peter's handwriting before I even opened it. I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling the familiar pressure return to my chest as I unfolded the legal papers. Ryan had filed for full legal guardianship, claiming I was mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs. The documents cited erratic behavior, questionable financial decisions, and potential self-neglect. Attached to it was a request to freeze my remaining accounts pending the hearing. For a few long minutes, I just sat there staring at the pages as if they belonged to someone else's life. I felt the quiet weight of betrayal settle deeper in my bones. This wasn't just anger anymore. This was warfare. My own child wanted to strip me of my rights, to turn me into a ward of the court because I had dared to make a decision without his approval. I called Peter immediately. "It's serious," he said, his tone calm but firm. "They're pushing hard, Eleanor. Emergency hearings, expedited orders. They already convinced the judge to temporarily freeze your accounts until you appear." "So, I have to go back," I said quietly. "Yes," Peter replied, "but you won't be going in there alone." In the days that followed, Maggie became my rock. She offered to accompany me back home, to stand by me in court, to testify about my clarity, my independence, and the choices I had made with full understanding. "I've seen people crumble under this kind of attack," she said one evening, sitting beside me under the stars of Silverton. "But not you, Eleanor. You're sharper than anyone I know. You stood up for yourself, and you're going to stand tall in that courtroom." I packed lightly. My favorite coat, a single suitcase, and the quiet steel growing in my heart. I was done letting anyone, especially my son, paint me as weak or unstable. Back in Wisconsin, the courthouse felt cold and indifferent, the walls gray and towering. I sat beside Peter in the hallway, Maggie on my other side, while Ryan strutted past with Camille glued to his side. He barely looked at me. Peter leaned in. "Don't let him rattle you. You've done nothing wrong, and the judge will see that." Inside the courtroom, the proceedings began. Ryan's attorney, a sharp-faced woman in a navy suit, stood tall, her voice oozing manufactured concern. "Your Honor, we are here today because my client, Mr. Ryan Whitman, fears for his mother's well-being. Mrs. Whitman has demonstrated increasingly unstable behavior. liquidating significant assets without consulting family, giving away her primary residence, moving across the country on a whim, isolating herself from loved ones. I clenched my hands in my lap, keeping my expression neutral as she continued. We have testimony from neighbors who reported erratic actions, walking outside barefoot at odd hours, unexplained visitors. Mrs. Whitman's actions suggest potential cognitive decline and possible coercion from outside parties. Peter stood calmly adjusting his glasses before addressing the judge. Your Honor, the only thing Mrs. Whitman is guilty of is living her life on her own terms after decades of sacrifice. She followed every legal procedure, handled her finances with complete transparency, and made informed decisions about her future. The judge, a middle-aged man with tired but kind eyes, looked at me directly. Mrs. Whitman, I'd like to hear from you. I stood every part of me steady. Your Honor, I began, my voice unwavering. For over 60 years, I was a wife, a mother, a caretaker. I lived within the walls of expectations, ignoring my own needs to ensure my family had everything. When my husband passed, I stayed quiet, making sure my son felt secure, making sure my grandchildren had a place to visit even when they rarely did. I glanced briefly at Ryan but kept my focus on the judge. But I realized something. No one was looking out for me. The house I built became a prison. My love became a commodity. I was not consulted about my future, I was managed. And when I refused to hand over my autonomy, my own child labeled me incompetent. I paused, letting the words sink into the silence. I sold my home because I wanted freedom. I gave it to someone who had shown me nothing but kindness. I enrolled in a course because I wanted to learn. I moved because I wanted peace. Not because anyone forced me, not because I lost my senses, but because I remembered I was allowed to have a life. Peter handed the judge the paperwork, bank statements, medical evaluations, legal documents, all proving my sound mind and deliberate actions. Maggie testified next, describing the woman I had become, the clarity I exhibited, the thoughtful way I made each decision. She spoke about my newfound independence, my financial responsibility, and my excitement about life. Ryan took the stand, spitting out half-truths and exaggerated concerns. Camille sat behind him, arms crossed, her expression one of practiced innocence. But I watched the judge and I could tell he wasn't buying it. After hours of testimony, the judge called a recess. My legs trembled slightly as I stood outside the courtroom, but Maggie's hand on my shoulder steadied me. You are winning this, she whispered. You're showing them exactly who you are. When we returned, the judge's verdict came swiftly. Mrs. Whitman has demonstrated full cognitive competence. Her actions, while unconventional, reflect autonomy, not instability. The petition for guardianship is denied, the financial freezes are lifted, and all rights remain solely with Mrs. Whitman. Ryan's jaw tightened. Camille whispered furiously into his ear. I felt the pressure in my chest dissolve like morning fog under the sun. The judge's final words stayed with me. Independence does not equal incompetence. Choosing joy is not grounds for confinement. Mrs. Whitman. I hope you enjoy this new chapter of your life. As we exited the courtroom, Peter grinned and shook my hand. You did it, Eleanor. You stood your ground. Maggie hugged me tight. You fought for yourself. And you won. I stepped outside the courthouse, inhaling deeply. The world felt different. Brighter, lighter. I wasn't someone's dependent, someone's forgotten elder, someone's quiet obligation. I was Eleanor Whitman, free, whole, and unburdened. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt truly free. The return to Oregon felt like a homecoming I never expected. As the rolling vineyards came back into view, I felt something settle inside me. A sense of place of belonging, not to a house or to a family, but to myself. I moved into a small rental cottage on the outskirts of Silverton, a quaint little place with creaky floors, ivy growing around the porch, and just enough room to breathe. Maggie rented the adjoining unit, and we quickly fell into an easy rhythm. Mornings spent sipping coffee on the porch, afternoons filled with laughter and stories, evenings ending with simple dinners and quiet contentment. Life was quieter here, but it was full. I took a part-time job at Cedar Hill Estates, the same vineyard where I had taken my sommelier course. I helped with tastings, guided small tour groups, and spent slow afternoons bottling wines and labeling shipments. My hands stayed busy, my mind stayed sharp, and my heart felt lighter with every passing day. I wasn't just passing time anymore. I was learning, growing, engaging. I made friends among the workers and locals, people who valued me for who I was, now not for who I had been expected to be. People who listened, laughed, and shared their own stories of change and rediscovery. A week after settling in an envelope arrived at my doorstep addressed in Ryan's familiar handwriting. My fingers lingered on the edges of the paper, hesitant to open it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was long, scattered, reflective in parts, defensive in others. Ryan wrote about how things had gotten out of hand, how emotions had been high, and how he just wanted what was best. There were no direct apologies, but there were glimmers of recognition. Small acknowledgments of what had gone wrong, lines like, "Maybe I didn't listen as much as I should have, and I guess I forgot that you've always been stronger than you let on." I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer. I wasn't ready to respond. I wasn't ready to open that door just yet. Not because of anger, but because for the first time in my life, I wanted my peace to remain undisturbed. At the vineyard, I met David. He was in my refresher wine class, a retired architect with an easy smile and a voice like warm tea. We first bonded over a shared frustration trying to distinguish between subtle earthy tones and oaky finishes, laughing at ourselves while the younger students took tasting notes like they were preparing for a final exam. Our conversations spilled beyond the classroom. He invited me to the local farmer's market, introduced me to his favorite bookshop tucked between a bakery and a flower shop, and showed me the best walking trails near the river. We talked about everything and nothing, about how life could surprise you even after 60, about how it was never too late to rediscover joy, about how the simplest pleasures often brought the deepest satisfaction. It wasn't romance. Not yet, maybe not ever. It was companionship. It was comfort. It was knowing someone enjoyed my company without expecting anything in return. For now, that was more than enough. In the evenings, Maggie and I would talk about our days. She teased me about David saying, "You've still got that spark." Eleanor and I would laugh, brushing it off, but secretly enjoying the thought. There was something healing about being seen by others who had no stake in controlling me, who simply enjoyed my presence. I found myself smiling. More, laughing, deeper, breathing, easier. The constant weight that had pressed on my shoulders for decades had lifted, and in its place was something unfamiliar but beautiful. Freedom, yes, but also a quiet, steady sense of self. One evening I stood on the porch watching the sun dip below the hills, painting the vineyards in hues of amber and rose. I thought about Ryan's letter, about the years I had spent clinging to the idea that motherhood meant endless sacrifice, that love was measured by how much you gave up. And for the first time I saw it clearly. This wasn't just about escaping Ryan's control or reclaiming my rights. This wasn't about proving a point or settling a score. This was about rediscovering Eleanor. I wasn't just running away from something. I was running toward something I had always deserved. Happiness, independence, joy. I pressed my palm against my chest, feeling the steady rhythm of my own heart, and smiled softly to myself. "This isn't just about breaking free," I whispered. "This is the beginning of me." The weeks in Oregon continued to pass softly, marked by the changing color of the vineyards and the gentle rhythm of simple living. I had stopped checking my phone obsessively, had stopped looking over my shoulder waiting for Ryan's next wave of anger. I didn't need those reminders anymore, but when the email came, it caught me off guard, not because of what it said, but because of the person it came from. It was from Ryan. Not a short, irritable burst of accusations like his messages before. This was a long letter, pages upon pages of unfiltered thoughts written late at night if the timestamp was any indication. His words were different this time, shaky, vulnerable, confused. He told me about how things had changed since the court ruling, how Camille had started pushing harder, demanding they sell their own house to upgrade to something bigger, better, flashier. She had started making subtle comments about the property she had wanted from me, about how life would be easier if they had more liquid assets. When Ryan hesitated, she pressed harder until eventually she said it outright. "You fought your mother for that house. Why wouldn't you fight for ours?" He wrote that those words hit him in a way nothing else had. For the first time, he realized Camille hadn't been trying to care for me. She had been trying to secure her own comforts. It became clearer with every conversation, every argument, every future plan that revolved not around family but around finances. And it started to eat away at him. The letter told me about the shouting matches, about the growing silence in their home, about how Ethan and Lily noticed the tension. Ryan confessed he began thinking about the old house, not about the property, but about the childhood it held, the memories embedded in every corner. He wrote about Christmas mornings, about how I used to wait up late to stitch missing buttons onto his shirts, about how I never once forgot his favorite meal, even when Gerald was gone. He remembered the nights I sat beside him when he had nightmares, the long weekends I spent driving him to soccer tournaments, the quiet sacrifices I made that no one celebrated, but that made life feel safe and whole. He told me how Camille didn't understand any of that, how she saw comfort only in things, in transactions, in titles. And slowly something inside him cracked open. He admitted they had separated. He admitted that for the first time he realized how much I had done, how much I had given, and how little gratitude he had ever shown me. And at the end of it, after paragraph upon paragraph of painful honesty, there was one simple line. "I'm sorry, Mom. Truly sorry." I read the letter 3 times before I allowed myself to feel anything. My heart ached because this was the son I had always hoped still existed beneath the layers of entitlement and arrogance. The little boy who used to call me his hero had not vanished entirely. He had only been buried under years of misplaced priorities. But I also felt something firmer, something stronger. Caution, wisdom. I didn't respond immediately. I let the words settle, let them find their rightful place in the complicated history between us. I drafted a reply only after I had spoken to Maggie, after I had walked by the river, after I had watched the sunset and listened to my own heart. My response was shorter, calmer, clearer. "Ryan, I hear your words and I appreciate the courage it took to write them. But apologies are not bandages. They don't fix wounds overnight. Love at its best is not conditional, and respect is not a bargaining chip. I have always loved you. That will never change. But love and trust are not the same thing. Trust must be rebuilt through actions, through patience, through the quiet work of showing up, not for what you can gain, but for who you choose to be. I am here living my life fully for the first time. If you wish to know me beyond the version you assumed I was, you'll have to do the same. Show me who you are without expectations or demands. Until then, I am exactly where I belong." Mom. I sent it, turned off my phone, and returned to my new life. In the weeks that followed, I focused on something that had quietly grown inside me. A calling to do more for women like myself. Women who had been forgotten in the shadows of motherhood, who had been told they were past their prime, who believed their lives had already peaked. With Maggie's encouragement, I started a small program at the community center, a simple class called Second Bloom. We gathered women from town, most of them over 50, some widowed, some divorced, many simply lonely and overlooked. We shared stories, taught each other recipes from our childhoods, learned about local wines, practiced basic financial literacy, and rediscovered forgotten dreams. I watched shy women light up after weeks of feeling invisible. I watched hands that had long been used for housework learn to sketch, to garden, to play instruments. I listened to laughter ripple through the little meeting room as we celebrated each other's small victories. It filled me with a sense of purpose I had never known before. Every so often I would receive an email from Ryan, updates, reflections, slow signs of growth. But I didn't rush back. I didn't abandon the life I was building. Because this journey had never been about running from him. It had always been about running toward myself. And for the first time in decades, I was blooming. Not because someone allowed it, not because I was useful to others, but because I chose it. This wasn't a story about rebellion. It was a story about resurrection. And I was just getting started. 6 months later, life had carved itself into something simple, beautiful, and deeply mine. Mornings began with sunlight peeking through linen curtains, the quiet rustle of vineyard leaves greeting me like old friends. By now I had earned my certification as a sommelier and was promoted to a lead guide at Cedar Hill Estates, taking visitors on slow winding tours through the grapevines, teaching them not just about wine, but about savoring moments. I felt at home in this world, among the earth-stained boots, the laughter shared over tasting tables, the soft swirl of red in crystal glasses. I taught people to listen to their senses, to slow down, to discover the beauty in simplicity. And every evening I walked back to my little cottage, a heart full, a mind calm. Maggie joked that I'd become a local celebrity, and maybe I had in a quiet, unassuming way. People sought me out for my stories, for my guidance, but more importantly for my presence, because I was present now in my own life every single day. Then one Saturday afternoon, something unexpected happened. A small white rental car pulled into the driveway of Cedar Hill. I was just finishing a private tasting session when I noticed the familiar figure stepping out looking unsure but determined. Ryan. Not Camille, just Ryan, dressed casually, holding something small wrapped in brown craft paper tied with twine. I felt my heart tighten, not from anger, but from the complicated tangle of history, blood, and cautious hope. He approached slowly, hands a little shaky. His eyes searched mine, not for permission, but for honesty. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. I nodded, keeping my stance easy but guarded. "What brings you here?" He looked around, taking in the rolling hills, the quiet serenity. "I wanted to see where you found yourself." I led him to a shaded spot under a large oak tree by the vineyard, away from the bustling tourists. We sat on a weathered bench, the view of the grapevines stretching endlessly before us. "I brought you something," he said, unwrapping the package. Inside was a framed photo. One I hadn't seen in decades. It was me and Gerald on Ryan's 10th birthday, frosting on our cheeks, smiles wide, eyes bright. Behind us, the old house stood tall before life began to weigh it down. I found it when I was cleaning out the garage. Ryan said, his voice tight. "I thought, maybe you'd like to have it here." I took the frame fingers, brushing over the glass memories, swirling like the smooth finish of a good wine. I swallowed the lump in my throat before speaking. "I appreciate this," I said quietly. "But let's be clear about something." Ryan straightened, attentive, perhaps expecting a lecture or worse, rejection. "I am not coming back to be a caretaker," I told him firmly. "I am not a walking wallet, not a backup plan, and certainly not free labor. Whatever relationship we have going forward will be built on respect, not entitlement." Ryan nodded, a deep breath shaking through him. "I know," he admitted. "I didn't for a long time. But I do now." I studied him for a long moment. There was something different in his posture, in the softened edges of his voice. Camille wasn't with him, and I suspected she wouldn't be returning. Life had dealt him lessons I hadn't needed to deliver. He had faced his own unraveling. "Then we start here," I said simply. Not as a duty, but as a choice. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat there, two people connected by history, quietly choosing a better version of themselves. After Ryan left, I tucked the photo inside my small cottage, placing it on a shelf that wasn't crowded by obligations or memories, but embraced by the peace of the present. Later that evening, I walked to my favorite hill overlooking the vineyard. I poured myself a glass of the estate's newest vintage, light, refreshing, kissed by Oregon's gentle sun. I sat alone, but I didn't feel lonely. At 64, I wasn't trapped by expectations, by roles I had outgrown, or by people who couldn't see my worth. I was my own woman, cultivating new friendships, savoring simple pleasures, teaching others to taste life fully. The breeze danced through the leaves, the vineyard bathed in amber light, and I smiled. Soft, real content. I'm not just living, I whispered to the quiet hills around me. I am truly free. If this story touched something in your heart, you're not alone. How many of us have given everything, our time, our love, our whole selves, only to be taken for granted? Have you ever felt like you were just useful to someone instead of being loved for who you are? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you found your freedom yet, or are you still waiting for that moment to choose yourself? Share your own experience in the comments below, because your voice matters here. And if these stories make you feel seen and understood, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss any of our next stories. Stories of quiet strength, of healing, of women just like you, reclaiming their dignity and rediscovering their joy. Your journey matters, and we'll be right here every step of the way.